So we're going to discuss the basic question of who belongs. And this is a question, a basic question of membership in the society, as well as standing, what standing one membership brings standing in the society. And every society has to address this basic question of membership and standing uh, in order to organize itself. And it's a question of who should be considered a citizen and thus a full participant in the society. And that goes along with the question of whether citizens should have equal standing or should their membership be distributed, should membership be distributed unequally in terms of a social hierarchy. And the prominent answer historically has been that citizenship, that standing should be distributed equally in a social hierarchy. However, justice, as we can understand it, challenges that notion. This is such a basic question because membership constitutes, one could say, the right to have rights, in the sense that it gives one standing into society, and standing gives one the right or the justification to make claims in that society. Therefore, equal standing is therefore the equal right to have equal rights. From this perspective, membership and equal standing are of singular importance. They are, I think, the basic question of justice. But that's arguable. At least the question of membership is of great importance, among other questions. But it is pretty fundamental, and thus its importance. A just society, from the perspective of a just society would determine membership and standing in terms of valid principles of justice and valid political values. And from the perspective of moral reasoning, in terms of fairness, the principles and values that determine membership should be consistent with the reciprocal recognition of all members of the society, that an equal reciprocal recognition. And that's our general framework for thinking about these basic questions of justice as we discussed last time, that we're going to appeal to moral reasoning in terms of fairness in order to determine, to evaluate the normative justifiability of various principles of justice within these various contexts, and in this context, the context of membership. Membership, the question of membership, of who belongs, is its basicness is grounded in our strong tendency, our strong social tendencies, very strong tendency to belong to a social group. And with that evolutionary tendency to belonging, there is always the threat of tribalism. There is always the threat of in-group bias and out-group hostility. And from the perspective of human psychology and evolution, we can think in terms of the ancient Greek notion of thymos, which is the demand for recognition and respect. So from this perspective, as Francis Fukuyama has discussed, among many others, that human beings have a strong desire, a necessity to be recognized and respected. And this takes two forms. One form is a desire to be recognized as a superior, to be superior to others. And the megalothemia, a desire to be recognized as a superior. And isothemia, a desire to be recognized as an equal. So we have these two basic desires of recognition, to be recognized as an equal, but also to be recognized as perhaps superior in some way to others. And this is reflected in our desire for the recognition, a desire for recognition for the achievements that we make in our lives, to be recognized, to stand out above the crowd, if you will, to be recognized for some kind of excellence or some kind of contribution or achievement. A third aspect of our psychology and our evolution is also the tendency to categorize and order the social world in terms of an us-them, an us versus them dichotomy, in-group and out-group organization or perception of the social world. And that presents often as in-group bias and out-group hostility. So we can go into these notions further. Given our need for belonging, and this is a very basic need, we're social beings. I believe that we have evolved this way. We have survived as a species, and individuals have survived because they have been members of social groups. Individual survival was highly unlikely as we evolved as a species. The lone individual was very vulnerable and probably could not survive long to reproduce, etc. So we have this very strong tendency for social belonging. And in fact, a form of torture is to be confined in isolation, in solitary confinement. In fact, if one is kept in solitary confinement without connection to others, one will experience severe psychological damage. So we're one could say we're wired to belong in social groups, and therefore we construct the social order in terms of group membership and identity. And this is a very strong tendency. And therefore, perceptions of and behavior towards others is structured by in-group and out-group categorizations. The group categorization is the way we create the social boundaries which shape our self-identity. Self-identity is based in group identity. Our identity is constructed dialogically in relation to the culture of the in-group that we're a member of. And both group inclusion and differentiation are driven by the desire to be recognized. And when that desire takes the form of megalothemia, the desire to be different from and superior to others, the social order is differentiated then in terms of in-group bias and favoritism and out-group hostility. These tendencies and dynamics are illustrated by two very classic research studies in social psychology by Musharraf Sharif and his colleagues and Henri Tajfel and his colleagues. And you read about those studies. Sharif study of the Rattlers versus the Eagles, the um, young adolescent boys taken on a camping trip and divided into groups and structured to compete against each other. Immediately, almost immediately, um, they begin, there are signs of in-group bias and out-group hostility begin to emerge between the Rattlers and the Eagles, such that they had to stop the experiment for fear of the two groups engaged in violence against each other. So culturally identical uh, persons, when divided into competitive groups, will will stimulate the tribalism dynamic. Henri Tajfel and his colleagues uh, brought together similar people of identical cultural identity and social class, etc., and also divided them in a meaningless way, not even a competitive way, but through a meaningless. They divided groups by their sorting of dots on a screen, and then were asked would they to distribute a financial benefit to their group members and the opposite group members, and a bias emerges immediately in favor of one's group, and though the groups are meaninglessly arranged. The conclusion from these studies is that the mere division into arbitrary and meaningless groups triggered tribalism. They trigger in-group bias and out-group hostility, revealing our strong tendency towards tribalism. So if we construct the social order in terms of our group membership and identity, and its beliefs and values that determine our identity, our group membership then becomes identity defining. Thus they have a profound influence on our view of the social world. And furthermore, our perceptions of others are shaped by whatever inferences we make regarding the attributes of individuals from other groups. So there is this very strong tendency to structure the social world in terms of in-group and out-group categories. These tendencies are reflected in the political ideology of nationalism. Hierarchical, unequal societies have appealed to identity-based ideologies, which serve as the core justification for determining membership and standing. And they do this in terms of a racial, ethnic, or cultural group identity. To belong, from the perspective of nationalism, to belong, one needs to be part of the ethnic and or cultural in-group. Nationalism as an ideology is grounded in both megalothemia, the desire to be recognized as a superior, as well as our tendency for tribalism. And nationalism justifies transferring one's individual identity and desire for recognition to the group one has membership in. So one's self-worth and one's identity is contingent then upon the groups prevailing or dominating over other groups. And this is the essence of nationalism as a political ideology. It's grounded in domination, and it's grounded in ethnic identity and in-group bias and out-group hostility. And all this drive to superiority, along with our differentiation in terms of groups, has led to the historical prevalence of unequal hierarchical societies. There has been a very long-standing belief that human beings differ in terms of their capabilities and also thus in terms of their social standing. And these requires a hierarchical system. The two prominent examples of hierarchical systems of membership in societies are that are grounded in certain ideologies as well are both racial segregation and white supremacy, the ideology of white supremacy, as well as patriarchy, that is the belief of male supremacy. And in terms of racial segregation and white supremacy, the in-group is based in race. The in-groups and out-groups are based in race. In terms of patriarchy, the tribalism is based in gender identifications and categories, and their various traits. Megalothemia can appear on the world stage, and often does, as a desire to be recognized as a superior to one nation desiring to be recognized as superior to other nations, and that drives domination. That drives a nationalist society to be a dominant power in the world and to have others comply with one's dominance. And this is the basis of imperialism and colonialism, as well as a cause of aggression. In Hegelian terms, it's the master-slave struggle for recognition on the world stage. And I discovered this drive for domination and aggression as reflected in the Bush Doctrine, as you read about, that our foreign policy under the Bush administration, in particular the influence by Dick Cheney, was to create a drive for world power, world dominance, to check any military or economic threat to the supremacy of the United States. And that was the primary justification of the invasion of Iraq, for example, by the United States. So these drives are not only within, and these tendencies towards domination and hostility are within societies, but they're also they also affect how we relate to other peoples, potentially, and how governments reflect those relationships. So defining membership and standing in terms of ethno-nationalism or tribalism, we could argue being a part of a defined racial or ethnic or cultural or gender group creates unequal hierarchies. We could argue, we could observe, and that are structurally violent and oppressive. We could therefore argue that determining who belongs based upon identity-based ideologies is inconsistent with the imperatives of fairness, that such a basis violates the elements of equality, recognition, reciprocity, and impartiality. And so we may have reason to reject determining membership and standing based upon the ascriptive characteristics of race, ethnicity, religion, and gender, among other ascriptive characteristics. and group characteristics. One could argue that fairness requires that we transcend our identities, which are based in these ascriptive and arbitrary characteristics. That's one possible argument. And that equal reciprocal recognition affirms that membership and standing should not be determined by an appeal to these characteristics because they are morally arbitrary from the perspective of fairness. However, it can be and has been argued that a person's cultural and ethnic identity, while ascriptive in one sense, is nevertheless, from the point of view of the person, an essential defining element of their identity. And this is the assertion of a dialogical understanding of identity. And this is consistent with our understanding of social groups and identity, that our identity is dialogically formed within the culturally thick traditions of the groups that we have membership in from an early age. And this is the idea of a dialogical as opposed to a monological identity. So from the perspective of a dialogical understanding of identity, one could argue that there is a right to cultural recognition, that a right to the recognition of a person's cultural identity and cultural background is necessary, a necessary element for respect for persons, for equal recognition, for moral equality. And that grounds a basic right to cultural recognition as a matter of fairness. Will Kimlicka and Iris Marion Young have argued that, for example, that this individual right to cultural recognition should be complemented by group rights to recognition. That a group has a right to develop its own culture on its own terms. And therefore, the idea of equal citizenship is contingent upon a conception of differentiated citizenship. That true inclusion of a diversity of cultural persons necessitates group representation. In order for individuals to be represented, their group has to be represented. So this is a move towards not only individual membership in a society, but the recognition of the group's right to membership in that society and to have full representation in that society. In response to these arguments, Jürgen Habermas argues that democracy itself entails cultural recognition. And his argument is that if rights and democracy are connected inherently, that is, democracy is a system of rights, and if identity is formed dialogically, and if democracy requires equal respect, then cultural recognition is implicit in democracy. Democracy itself demands equal respect, and that entails inherently an equal cultural recognition. And Habermas argued that there was no need to specify to have a specification of collective rights or group rights, that they were already entailed that cultural recognition was already entailed in a democratic society. So we can now turn, with that background, we could turn to potential principles, just principles of membership. So if nationalism is rejected as invalid, then we can ask what specific principles of justice follow from equal reciprocal recognition, including possibly cultural recognition. One one perspective is that it's that justice requires, under the conditions of cultural pluralism and ethnic pluralism in a society and across societies, is that generally shared political values and principles should be grounded, should form the basis of a civic identity. That even though we have diverse points of view and diverse cultural values that may be in conflict with each other, it is possible to possibly we could agree across that diversity to a set of values and principles that we can all accept and affirm and thereby share and thereby identify with. So affirming common political values and principles can form a common civic identity, which could be the basis of membership and standing among citizens who in other respects have pluralistic identities. And possibly this civic identity can instantiate equal reciprocal recognition and fairness. So one counter to the diversity, or one answer to the diversity, cultural diversity, and is to promote a civic identity that is grounded in common political values and political principles of justice. John Rawls discusses this in his important book, Political Liberalism, as the idea of an overlapping consensus around a political conception of justice, which we could identify as the basis of a common identity. Secondly, toleration is a key potential key principle for determining membership in a diverse society. The affirmation of a respect-based tolerance. And the philosopher Rainer Forst makes a distinction between a permission-based conception of toleration and a respect-based conception of toleration. The permission conception, which is historically prevalent, is that and not justifiable in terms of fairness, that conception is based in a relationship between a dominant authority or a majority and a minority. And in this conception, the authority grants qualified permission to the minority to live according to their own beliefs and practices. This has been practiced throughout history among diverse societies. In certain ways, the Roman Empire was based upon a permission conception of toleration. The Ottoman Empire was also based in qualified permission. But here, the toleration is conditional, It's contingent upon the acceptance of the power of the authority, and the minority accepts its subordinate position, and the price for toleration is subservience and loyalty to the dominant party, the dominant authority. That is, in the permission conception of toleration, toleration is non-reciprocal. It's based in a non-reciprocal granting of permission, and also a conception of toleration that doesn't afford the minority equal recognition. It can tend to be repressive in the sense that to be tolerated means to accept inequality. And it's also disciplining in that it effectively preserves the power of the dominant authority. So we could argue that the permission conception is not consistent with fairness. Forst offers us a more justifiable conception of toleration as respect-based conception. And this notion of toleration is based in reciprocal horizontal recognition. It constitutes respect for citizens as equals, as free and equal citizens. It's grounded in mutuality, in a shared basis of respect for persons. And the principles of justification in terms of fairness define the limits of toleration in this conception. So to further explain this notion, the difference between the permission and respect-based conceptions of toleration lie in terms of the limits of where the limits of toleration are drawn. Are the limits drawn based on identities or on the basis of the toleration of differences out of respect for persons and shared political values and principles? So the idea of toleration is based upon three components. There is an objection component, that toleration comes into play when we object to someone's beliefs or social practices that we disagree with their beliefs or practices. We find them unappealing in some way. The second element is then is accepting, even though we disagree, we can still accept the person's right to form and exercise their own beliefs and practices. For example, accepting another's right to, we may disagree with their religious beliefs. For example, we may hold a set of religious beliefs that are in disagreement and conflict with another person's or another group's religious beliefs, and we will never agree as long as we hold to the doctrines of our two religions. We'll never agree about changing them. But so this is what triggers toleration. Toleration in the permission conception, we would say to the minority religious group that you can practice your religion only if you give political allegiance to us, and also your practice of religion will tolerate your practice of religion as long as it doesn't interfere with our position, our domination, our authority, or our practices as the dominant group. The respect-based conception of toleration bases the toleration in principle, in the sense that in the example of religious difference, uh, we could agree to a fundamental right to freedom of religion or freedom of conscience. And therefore, we can accept the fact that others have different religious beliefs and not interfere with those religious beliefs because we recognize their right to freedom of religion. So in this case, this is a respect-based notion of toleration. We're tolerating the difference, be on the ground of a shared principle of right. And the third component is that if the practice or the belief is not grounded in a shared principle or value or right, that's the basis upon which we can reject the beliefs and practices of others. And that marks the limit of toleration. For example, respect-based toleration does not require that we tolerate the beliefs of racists, of white supremacists, for example, because the white supremacist their beliefs are beliefs of superiority and the denial of the rights of others. And so that from the respect-based point of view, from the point of view of fairness, those set of beliefs are intolerable and we would reject them because they violate the rights of others. So from this perspective, one accepts and affirms the rights that justify the other choices while objecting to the content of some of those choices. In terms of membership in international society, historically, in the last 300 years, nation states, in particular sovereign governments of nation states, have been deemed the citizens of international society. And from this perspective, only states who are sovereign, who are governed by sovereign governments, have membership and standing in international society. And that makes it an international system. And the basic principle of international society is both the sovereignty of the nation as well as a principle of non-intervention, that everyone agrees not to interfere in the affairs of each other. It can be argued, however, that nation states do not possess rights in themselves, but represent the rights of individuals that comprise them. That non-intervention, sovereignty and non-intervention both rest on the individual right of security of person as well as the right to self-determination, grounded in the recognition of equality and respect for persons. The source of sovereignty, one could argue, is therefore individual rights. From this perspective, peace and justice can be achieved through the establishment of a global order that guarantees the rights of all human beings. And that includes equal membership and standing, the right to have rights. It transcends but includes the principles of international society by including human rights. This argument suggests the existence of a global community of citizens, a global civil society within which each person has equal standing in the human moral community, recognized as free and equal persons, and that is instantiated by a system of human rights. So for perspective, we have the existence of a global society, within which every human being has membership and standing. And that standing is instantiated by a conception of human rights. And these rights pertain also to membership in particular. And there is, within this global system of human rights, there's a human right to membership. That is Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to a nationality and that no one should be arbitrarily deprived of nationality or be denied the right to change one's nationality. So when the individual's membership and standing in a global moral community bestows a right to national citizenship and membership. So everyone has a human right to be a member of a nation state. And this global standing of individuals has a limiting effect on the sovereignty of nation states, in the sense that if a national government commits or allows significant violations of human rights of its own citizens, in particular genocide, but also other crimes, it has violated fairness and recognition, and thus lost its claim to sovereignty. And this idea has been established in international law and international ethics, and relates to the idea of the principle of the responsibility to protect. That sovereignty is not absolute, but conditional or contingent upon the protection of the rights of citizens. This first emerged after World War II at the Nuremberg Tribunal, where the Nazi defense was that they were a sovereign nation and they could treat their citizens in the manner that they saw fit. At Nuremberg, it was argued that sovereignty did not include crimes against humanity, or could not sanction crimes against humanity, as well as war crimes. Therefore, what is a complement to a right to citizenship and the contingency of sovereignty is the human right to seek political asylum. And this is stipulated in Article 14 of the Universal Declaration. Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. So there's a human right to seek asylum if one is being persecuted in one's own country, politically persecuted or threatened. One has a right to seek protection from other countries by seeking asylum in other countries. One can be protected from the persecution of their own governments. This is clearly, for example, this is clearly written also into United States immigration law, that the law that has been established is that political asylum is a fundamental right. And thus, if you recall, in recent years, the Trump administration significantly interfered with the protection of a right to political asylum on the Mexican border. There is also related to immigration, the right, there is a right to leave one's country and join another, that is to immigrate with an E. The right to leave one's country, not only to seek political asylum, but there is a human right to change one's country, to change one's citizenship. One has a human right, if one chooses, to leave one country and join another country. And this is a fundamental right, basic human right pertaining to membership, that one can change, one has a right to change one's membership, one's nationality. The question emerges, is there a right to immigration? To immigrate, to join another country, one can leave one's country, but there is no right as currently established to join a particular other country. So one has a right to leave one's country, but other countries have a right. A country, the hosting country has a right to either accept you into their country or to reject you. And this then relates to principles of justice what principles of justice should guide immigration policy. One prominent reason for immigration, letting people into one's country, is for economic benefit, to welcome workers into one's national economy. And this includes both highly skilled workers, but it also includes persons who are willing to do unpleasant work, work that other naturalized citizens are not willing to do. The normative principle here should be to avoid exploitation, the exploitation and oppression of workers that are allowed to immigrate into one's country. So immigrant workers should be treated fairly by the host country. And a second principle is that the choice of immigrant should not be based upon racial, ethnic, gender, or sexual orientation. Or I should have included religion there as well. That choice, the allowance of an immigrant into one's country, should not be determined by their ascriptive characteristics. Such would discriminate. Such a choice would be discriminatory and would violate fairness. So a fair and non-discriminatory immigration should be the standard of immigration justice. So those are my thoughts on the questions of who belongs, the question of membership and standing.